So we see an example here of an arm lock escape that goes right into another pinning position and also punishment hold driven by the legs. And I should also, real quick, just say that what I mean specifically by armbar attempt here is in these old catch wrestling and vintage pro wrestling matches, the armbar that they were usually talking about was what they called the Japanese arm lock. And as confusing as this is to say out loud, Japanese arm lock does not mean the straight armbar juji-gatame, as we would call it in judo and jiu-jitsu. It usually meant a bicep slicer. Okay, so there's not really necessarily a lot of evidence that a lot of these old catch wrestlers and vintage pro wrestler guys were doing straight arm bars. It's just very rare. I've only seen one or two clips in my travels where it looks like one of the guys kind of might have been doing that. But honestly, they were usually hunting for the bent bicep slicer from that position rather than a straight arm bar. Um, but anyway, this particular clip shows an arm lock escape. And again, it's an escape from Japanese arm lock, aka bicep slicer. But that escape turns into a potential punishment hold, aka like what we would call a tap here, even though the goal for this wrestler is to make a pin, not to get a submission, not to make the guy say uncle. Just historical context, it was actually surprisingly rare, according to a lot of the old catch guys who are still around. Like there's a fellow from Lancashire who was one of Billy Robinson's students. I forget his name at the moment, but he basically said that on the catch wrestling win registers for method of victory, there was literally zero submission victories, even though some of the rules negotiated would allow that. So these punishment holds, again, they were designed to get people to pin themselves voluntarily. They were meant to guide someone's body into a compromised pin, not necessarily to make them say uncle. And the specific case that we see here is this Japanese arm lock escape, aka bicep slicer escape, which in a lot of its function is a lot like an escape we would actually do from a straight armbar, while also making sure our joint doesn't get exploded by a slicer, which is a real dangerous injury when it happens. But that escape feeds right into this leg splitter, and it has a lot in common with crotch ripper, except the crotch rippers would have a belly up in modern grappling, like they'd be done from the truck. And in this case, it's done belly down. So in a way, even though it has like the lateral crotch ripper, like hip spreading dynamic, the top position has a lot more in common with what we would call in modern submission grappling parlance the electric chair submission that the 10th Planet guys do. Um, so this is a real clear example of an escape from a submission that attacks an arm with legs, right? Just like conventional arm bars, they attack an arm with the help of leverage from the legs. But anytime you attack with your legs, whether it be a triangle choke, whether it be arm bars, any of these sorts of things, you're giving up a leg submission of one variety or another. We just don't necessarily see this transition that often. But I would argue it's a very special one. And in my own roles, when I do armbar escapes, I end up in opportunities for this kind of punishment hold all the time. And I think other people do too. But when they experience it, I think they automatically register it as something that has a lot in common with one of their guard pass attempts, and they usually just clear that top leg rather than letting it ride here as sort of a punishment hold. But in this case, I would argue that there's a distinct possibility where you could get a tap in the way that Eddie Bravo, the 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu guy, describes as quote unquote testing their flexibility. And what he means by that is if they don't necessarily tap from it, um, then you say, okay, well, congratulations, you're flexible, but now I'm going to turn it into a sweep or another positional change. But it's such a low risk investment in saying, oh, maybe this guy's inflexible enough to tap to this. And that's kind of the value of those submissions. So, in my opinion, this bit of archival footage could still be drilled and pulled off to this day to have an experiment for people who want to try pulling off this submission. And again, at the very least, what you get out of it is a guard pass.